Why must Satan be released? That's the question that Revelation chapter 19 and 20 poses to us. Why must Satan be released? This question is birthed from Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20 in verse 1. I mean, when we get to Revelation 20 verse 1, we're actually at a pretty exciting moment. I mean, we have been at this point enduring 19 chapters of this onslaught of the enemy, and finally some really good news happens where the chief of the unholy trinity is actually finally starting to be dealt with. It says in chapter 20 verse 1, "And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss," the same key we saw in Revelation 1, the same key we saw in Revelation 9, this key from the cross and the resurrection, the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. The angel seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is called the devil or Satan, remember Revelation 12, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. We get some good news here. Satan is bound, which the word literally means manacled, shackled, in chains. He is imprisoned, put into a prison. And it even says he is sealed. That Greek word there for sealed is the same word that is used in Luke's gospel where Jesus' stone is put in front of his tomb and the Roman Empire seals it to make sure that no one tampers with it. This is good news. And then comes the last half of verse 3. And this would really be jarring to the audience. After that, Satan must be set free for a short time. And then he goes on talking about thrones. And you're going, whoa, 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 what do you mean? As a matter of fact, this is actually even worse in the Greek. Because it says he must. The word must there in Greek is known as the divine necessity. That God has mandated whatever it is that follows. Which prompts the question, excuse me, why does God mandate that Satan be released? In order to answer this question, we have to actually engage two things. Number one, the narrative of Revelation. We have to dive a little bit deeper. And number two, Roman history. First, the narrative. In Revelation chapter 16, something comes on the scene for the first time that we will see repeated 3 times. It's what I refer to as the no battle motif. The no battle motif. First time we see it is in Revelation chapter 16. You know which Revelation chapter 16 is? It's the bowls. We've already seen the bowls poured out. But in chapter 16, verse 14, listen to what it says. It talks about these spirits that are coming out of the mouth of the unholy trinity. It says they are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. A gathering for war. Here's what's interesting. They gather for war, but there is no battle. Matter of fact, in verse 17, right after the gathering for battle, right after the interlude, it says, "Then the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, 'It's finished.'" It's done. Like, how's that possible? They gather for battle, and then right whenever you expect the battle to happen, it's over. Guess what? It happens again. It happens also in Revelation chapter 19. In Revelation 19, we see that the 2 beasts have come together to fight against the rider on the white horse. Chapter 19, verse 19. "Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war." Same phrase. They gather together to fight a battle. Here's what's crazy. There is no battle. Literally, the very next verse. "But the beast was captured. The false prophet who also performed signs, he was captured. And those 2 are thrown alive into the lake of burning sulfur, Verse 21, the rest were killed with the sword. There's no battle, just an execution, which is very strange because it happens a third time. The third time is in Revelation chapter 20. Satan is bound in verses 1 through 3, and then in verse 7, he is released. And what's crazy is he is released, and it says specifically that he goes to the four corners of the earth, I'm in verse 8, and he gathers all of the nations for battle. And guess what? They all follow the dragon, and they all gather for battle. They surround the city God's love, and then fire comes down and wipes them all out. I'm not even playing. Verse 9, they marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves, but fire came down from heaven and devoured them. 3 times in Revelation, there's a gathering for battle, but there is no war, just an execution. Why? We're not ready to answer that question yet. We need one more detail in order for this to all come together. In Revelation chapter 19, this is after the wedding feast of the Lamb. Jesus appears in chapter 19, verse 11, as this majestic rider on the white horse. It says, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire, kind of like we saw in Revelation 1. And on his head are many crowns. And he has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. And then comes this detail in verse 13. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, which is interesting. Because remember I told you in 19, verse 19, that's when they gather together for battle. But Jesus is coming to a battle already with his robe dipped in blood? Whose blood is it? That's a question. I mean, if it's his enemies, you would think that it would wait till the battle actually happened before the enemy's blood got on his clothes. But here might be the clue. Jesus shows up to a battle wearing the clothes of his victory. So let's piece this all together. Every time there is announced a battle, there is no battle, just an execution. And Jesus appears in 19, which is supposed to be another gathering for battle, but his robe is already dipped in blood. Whose blood is it? His own. Because remember in Revelation chapter 12, verse 11, they conquered the dragon by the blood of the Lamb and by the testimony of the saints that would not shrink from death. Here's the point of all this. One of Satan's greatest deceptions is to convince the church, is to convince Christians, is to convince the holy ones that the battle is still in question, that the reigning of the kingdom has not begun, that the battle is still raging on, and he has an opportunity and maybe even the potential of winning. But Revelation makes this very clear. There is no battle to be fought because Jesus won the decisive victory on the cross of Calvary. They conquered the dragon by the blood of the Lamb and by the testimony of the saints that would not shrink from death. The battle's already over. Therefore, the gatherings for battle are more like a charade. They're more like a performance than they are a real threat. Remember I told you, the only way to answer this question is if we look deeper into the narrative of Revelation and if we look a little bit deeper into Roman history. In the history of Rome, there is something really significant known as the Roman Triumphal Procession. The Roman Triumphal Procession. The Triumphal Procession was not small. As a matter of fact, somebody could only be awarded a triumphal procession if they had won a battle that significantly expanded the empire. It is the highest of honors that an emperor or a general could experience in the Roman world. And every triumphal procession had some key elements that you always had to have, always. First of all, you had the citizens of Rome. They would show up to this days-long parade. They would show up and they would always be wearing white robes, symbolizing victory. kind of like the people that show up with Jesus in Revelation chapter 19, verse 14, where it says, the armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. In a Roman triumphal procession, they would always show up to the parade. They would surround the parade route wearing white robes. And what they were trying to do is to catch a glimpse of the spoils of war. Because a triumphal procession would be parading all of these foreign weapons and all of these exotic animals and these exotic fauna and flora, trying to demonstrate the significance of the battle that had been won. At times, you would see placards that are going through all of these spoils of war that would have the names of the places they had conquered and the number of people that were slaughtered. It was a way of bringing the citizens that did not get to experience the battle into the very battle itself. And the more exotic, the greater the honor. Another key element was the enemy soldiers. They would actually, after the war, they would keep the tallest and the most beautiful and the most impressive soldiers. They would keep them to march in the triumphal procession, to demonstrate to the citizens of Rome that this was no small victory. No, this was a victory over a menacing enemy, that now you can sleep at night knowing that they have been subjugated, that they have been conquered. Another one of the key elements of a triumphal procession was depictions of the battle. They would have elaborate floats. As a matter of fact, the concept of like a July 4th parade or a homecoming parade where you would make these floats, that comes from Roman triumphal processions. And they would have these floats, and they would be vivid depictions of exact moments in the battle where they would at times stop the parade and reenact the moment of the victory, and using those moments as ways to even execute some of the enemy soldiers on the scene, so that the citizens don't just have to hear about a battle, they can actually be drawn into it and participate in it. All of these elements were essential, but there was one key element that everybody was looking for, that everybody was waiting on. The element was the chief enemy leader. The chief enemy leader would be bound in chains, and he would march right in front of the triumphant general. And everyone was looking to catch a glimpse of this general. So significant was this general for a triumphal procession that Roman soldiers would do everything they could to not kill the enemy leader. They wouldn't do it. As a matter of fact, Augustus, whenever he won the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, whenever he won the Battle of Actium over Mark Antony and over Cleopatra, Mark Antony ends up committing suicide, and Augustus becomes nervous, agitated, going after Cleopatra because he was afraid that she would die, and he said, and I would be robbed of all the glory of a triumph. As a matter of fact, whenever Cleopatra commits suicide, Augustus and his soldiers burst into the room and actually attempt to resuscitate her so that she could be marching in the triumphal procession. The chief enemy leader bound in chains was so important that at times, in order to make sure that everything came together according to plan, at times the enemy leader was kept imprisoned for years, sometimes even decades, before they could experience the parade. Narrative of Rome, or the narrative of Revelation, history of Rome. Now we need to ask this question again. So why must Satan be released? Remember, the word must brings in a very different level to this. It is a must in the sense of mandated by God. That God actually is saying, I am desiring, demanding, devising Satan's release. Let's read chapter 20, verse 7, and I want to point out there's one detail that is quite significant that is missing. Verse 7, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. Remember, I told you in chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, there were 3 key elements that happened to Satan. Yes, he was imprisoned. Yes, the prison door was sealed over him, and he was also bound in chains. But here in chapter 20, verse 7, it does not say that he is released from his chains. It says he's released from prison, which presents this picture. Satan emerges from his prison, marching, still manacled. marching bound in chains. And he goes out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth. And then all of a sudden, thrown into the middle of the Greek sentence is the words Gog and Magog, almost like a placard in the middle of a parade. And to gather them for battle. Gather them for what battle? In number, they are like the sand on the seashore, an immense, powerful, incredible army. And they marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves, at the climactic moment in a triumphal procession. The chief enemy leader would be led aside and everybody would stand silent at the foot of the steps of the temple of Jupiter. And at the signal, they would begin to celebrate because the chief enemy leader would become a living sacrifice on behalf of the gods that gave Rome the victory. A sacrifice. Listen to what happens to him. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. Fire, like on an altar, grabbing a hold of the sacrifice and then raising it to heaven as merely the smoke rising above to the Lord. All of this together, let's just recap. Satan is bound, imprisoned, and sealed. But in Revelation, we have this building no battle motif because the battle has already been won on the cross. And inside of a Roman setting, there is this belief that the battle that has been won over here is not fully consummated until they experience a triumphal procession. And the key elements are all present in the text. The spoils of war, the enemies that are being paraded, the reenacting of the destruction of the enemy in key moments of the battle. What am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that the reason why Jesus comes to this parade in 19 with his robe dipped in blood is because he knows he's not coming to a battle. That battle's already been won. What Jesus is attending, what the armies of heaven dressed in white are attending, is God's triumphal procession. You see, Satan must be released, divine mandate, not in order to attack the church, not in order to pretend that the battle hasn't been won. Satan is released to reenact the moment of his defeat. He is released to march bound in chains as the chief enemy leader of the unholy Trinity. He is bound and he is marched in God's triumphal procession. And here's the plea from Revelation 19 to 20. Don't be deceived. Satan's final deception is to say that Jesus' cross didn't win, that there's still a chance. There is no battle to be fought. Don't be deceived. Satan is trying to say, the kingdom isn't here yet. It's in the future. I still have a chance. Don't be deceived. You, church, are the kingdom and priests on earth through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. What Satan wants to do more than anything is to convince us that the battle hasn't been won, because if he can convince us of that, we might begin to forget who we are, the kingdom and priests. And if we forget who we are, he knows this, if we forget who we are, then ultimately we will forget what to do.